The truck's blower motor cost me $240. I know that because I just picked up the part that morning, and it was sitting on my workbench in a paper bag when my grandson backed his brand new Mustang straight into my garage door and put a dent the size of a bowling ball through it. He got out, looked at the door, looked at me, and laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a real one. And the strangest part of that whole afternoon wasn't the dent. It was that I didn't say a word. 66 years old, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I just stood there and let it happen. Nobody in that driveway had any idea that 3 days later, I'd be the reason his name came off a bank account he thought nobody knew about. If you've ever kept the peace so long you forgot what your own voice sounded like, stay with me, because this one's for you. Before I get into it, do me a favor and hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what state you're watching from tonight. All right, let me tell you about the door, and the boy, and the 3 days that came after. My name is Harold Whitfield. Everybody except my late wife called me Harold. She called me Hal, and only her, right up until the last morning I heard her voice. I spent 31 years running a machine shop off Route 9 outside Erie, Pennsylvania, grinding tolerances on parts for companies that never once thanked me by name, and I built that business out of a single lathe and a bank loan my father co-signed against his own house. I sold it 8 years ago to a fellow named Mercer, who still calls me twice a year when something breaks that nobody younger than me knows how to fix. I live alone now in the same 2-story colonial my wife Dot and I bought in 1987, the one with the wraparound porch she always wanted, and the garage I built myself one summer with my brother-in-law, and a rented cement mixer. Dot passed 4 years ago this coming November. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks start to finish, fast enough that I barely had time to be angry about it before I just had to be sad instead. I held her hand in the front bedroom the morning she went, and I have not slept a full night since, not one, though I've gotten better at pretending. Sunday dinners kept me tethered to something after that. Same table, same tablecloth she embroidered the year Nixon resigned. Same recipe for her pot roast that I make from a card in her handwriting so faded I've had to guess at 2 of the words for going on 3 years now. My daughter Karen almost never missed a Sunday. She's 36, teaches 3rd grade over in Mill Creek, and she is kind down to the bone, or she used to be, before she got tired of standing between her husband's family and mine and started drifting toward the side of the room that made her life easier. Her husband is a man named Trevor Holt, 39, sells commercial real estate, drives a truck that costs more than my house did in 1987, and has a way of talking to me that would sound almost respectful if you didn't listen closely enough to hear what was underneath it. Grandpa, they've got hearing aids now that connect to your phone, you know. Still driving that old Buick? I hear insurance companies give you a discount if you just let them take it off your hands. Everybody would chuckle. Karen would give my arm a little squeeze afterward, the kind that means, Dad, don't make it a thing. And I never did, because I loved my daughter more than I loved my pride, and because in her last week, Dot made me promise I'd keep this family sitting at one table, no matter what it cost me. I kept that promise longer than any reasonable man should have. The grandson is where this really starts, though. Cole. Karen and Trevor's boy, 22, home from college for the summer, and the spitting image of his father in every way that matters, which is to say he'd learned exactly how far a joke could go by watching his own dad get away with it for years. That Saturday started fine. Real Pennsylvania summer, the kind Dot used to love, humid enough that the cicadas were already going by 10 in the morning. I had a brisket going since dawn, low and slow the way my father taught me, and I was out in the garage sorting through a toolbox when I heard tires on the gravel and looked up to see Cole's Mustang, a graduation gift from Trevor that I happened to know cost more than I made in my first 4 years running the shop, coming up the driveway too fast, the way 22-year-olds always drive when nobody's ever told them no. He clipped the corner of the garage door. I heard the crunch before I saw it, that particular sound of metal folding that 31 years in a machine shop teaches you never to mistake for anything else. I came around the side just in time to see him get out, survey the damage for about 2 seconds, and then look at me and grin like I'd been the one driving. "Whoa," he said. "Sorry, Grandpa. Guess I clipped it." And then, because apparently that wasn't enough, he added, "Honestly, you should get an automatic door anyway. This one looks like it's from the Nixon administration." I want to be honest with you the way I promised myself I'd be honest in this story, because there's an embarrassing thing I have to admit. My first instinct, standing there looking at a dent that would cost me real money to fix, put there by a boy who hadn't worked a single day in his life for anything he owned, was to smile and say it's fine, Don't worry about it. That's what 30 years of keeping a family calm does to a man. It rewires the alarm system in your chest so that somebody else's carelessness starts to feel like your job to smooth over. If you've ever caught yourself apologizing for someone else's mess just to keep the room comfortable, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. But I didn't say it's fine. For the first time in longer than I could tell you, I just stood there and said nothing at all. And Cole, reading my silence as something other than what it was, laughed again, said something about old guys getting sensitive over nothing, and walked past me into the house to get a beer out of my refrigerator like he owned the place. I stood in that driveway a long moment with the smell of brisket drifting out from the smoker and the sun hot on the back of my neck, and something in me that had been quiet for 4 years, maybe longer, sat up and took notice. Dinner that evening was strange in the way dinners get strange when everybody in the room decided beforehand not to talk about the thing that actually happened. Trevor made one comment about how Cole needs to be more careful, delivered with about as much conviction as a weather forecast, and Karen changed the subject to a parent-teacher conference she'd had that week, and I sat there eating brisket I'd smoked for 6 hours, while nobody asked whether a man my age standing in a hot driveway watching his garage get dented was doing all right. Not one person asked if I was okay. The only thing anybody seemed concerned about, once Trevor finally noticed the door on his way out, was whether I was going to make Cole pay for it. I want to read you something, because 3 days later I got proof of exactly how that family had sorted its priorities, and I think the proof is the story. Sunday night around 9, a text from Karen. Dad, don't make a big deal out of the door thing, Cole feels bad enough. Monday morning from Trevor, Harold. Kids make mistakes. Hope you're not going to be weird about this all summer. Monday evening, from Cole himself. And this is the one that sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. Sorry about your door, lol, my dad said. Just get it fixed and send him the bill. He'll Venmo you. 3 messages. Not one of them asked if I was hurt or shaken or even mildly upset watching a boy laugh at wrecking something I built with my own hands. Just logistics. Just make sure the old man doesn't turn this into a thing. I sat at my kitchen table Monday night with coffee gone cold in front of me, reading those 3 texts over and over, doing the arithmetic on everything that wasn't in them. The house does something particular when it's been full of a woman for 30 years, and then suddenly isn't. The refrigerator hums different. The stairs creak in places that never used to bother announcing themselves. Dot's chair still sits across from mine at that table, same worn spot on the seat cushion from 30 years of Sunday dinners, and I have never once been able to bring myself to move it, though I know men who cleared out every trace of a wife within a year of losing one. Every room in that house still has her fingerprints on it. The recipe box by the stove, the ceramic rooster on the windowsill she bought at a flea market in 1994 and refused to explain why she loved so much. And on that Monday night, for the first time, I felt like a guest in my own kitchen, in the house Dot and I built out of 2 incomes and a second mortgage we paid off 6 years early through nothing but stubbornness. Tuesday afternoon I was in the garage, actually fixing the door myself, because the idea of waiting on somebody else's Venmo transfer felt worse than the dent did, when Walter Neary showed up in my open doorway the way he does most Tuesdays, retired postal carrier, walks a beagle that's older than some of my tools, and has been dropping by since about 3 months after Dot's funeral with some excuse or another about a tomato surplus. He stood there a minute with his hands in his pockets, which worried me, because Walter Neary is a man who will talk your ear off about postage rates for 20 minutes without pausing for breath. And right then he looked like a man working up to something he didn't want to say. Been thinking about Saturday, he finally said. I told him it was fine, kids being kids. No, he said, and something in his voice made me put the drill down. Hal, I don't think it was an accident. I asked him what he meant. He said he'd been walking Biscuit past the end of my driveway that Saturday morning, right before the brisket went on, and he'd seen Cole sitting in that Mustang in the street for a good 2 minutes, on the phone, before he ever pulled in. And when he finally did pull in, Walter said, he wasn't looking at the driveway. He was looking right at the garage door, at me standing in the doorway, the whole time he came up that gravel. He watched you the entire way in, Walter said. Then he clipped it dead center. That's not a distracted driver, Hal. That's a boy showing off. I stood there feeling something cold move through my chest, the particular kind of cold that comes from having a suspicion confirmed instead of invented. And then Walter, because he'd apparently been saving the worst for last, told me the rest. Back in the spring, he said, he'd been walking Biscuit past the Holtz place over on Kestrel Lane, and Trevor had been out front with 2 other men in golf shirts, laughing about something, And Walter had only caught one piece of it clearly, Trevor's voice, saying that once the old man's reflexes finally go, that garage of his is basically a paid-off three-car workshop sitting on a half-acre that would flip beautiful. My own son-in-law, standing in his own front yard, talking about my house and my garage like a line item in a spreadsheet he was already drafting. I laughed once, not because any part of it was funny, but because my body genuinely did not know what else to do with information like that. The house where Karen learned to ride a bicycle in that same driveway. The house where I held Dot's hand while she stopped breathing. Already assessed, already assigned a projected value. He was just waiting on the vacancy. I didn't sleep that night, not that I sleep well most nights anyway. I sat up with an old photo album, the kind with the sticky plastic pages that don't peel back clean anymore, and went through the whole thing front to back. Karen at 7, gap-toothed, holding up a Father's Day card covered in glitter that I'm pretty sure I'm still finding in carpet corners to this day. Karen at 17, rolling her eyes at a prom photo. Karen at 26 in this same backyard, laughing at something with her mother that I can't for the life of me remember now. And then the newer pages. Karen and Trevor at Thanksgiving. Karen and Trevor at Christmas, his arm around her waist, his smile, the kind that looks rehearsed even in a snapshot. And me, somewhere at the edge of most of those frames, half-cropped, usually the one holding the camera. I ran my thumb over one photograph of Dot and asked the empty kitchen if I had missed something. I don't know who I thought would answer. Maybe I was hoping she would. I thought about calling Karen right then. My thumb actually hovered over her name in my phone, but I put it down, because I realized something had shifted in me that I couldn't quite name yet, and I didn't trust myself not to say something I'd regret before I understood what I actually wanted to say. So I made the first decision in longer than I could remember that had nothing to do with keeping anybody else comfortable. I decided to pay attention, quietly, carefully. The way you listen to an engine that's about to tell you something's wrong, long before it actually breaks down. Because if Trevor and his boy believed that age made a man harmless, they'd made the mistake of confusing quiet with empty. And 31 years running precision equipment teaches you that quiet rarely means off. It usually just means something's still spinning, waiting. After that Tuesday, I stopped seeing the little comments as jokes and started seeing them as scouting reports. Every remark about my knees, every offer to help me downsize, every casual question about whether I'd ever thought about assisted living out near where Karen and Trevor lived, all of it started arranging itself into a pattern I'd been too tired, or too grieving, or too determined to keep the peace, to notice before. Karen stopped by that Thursday after school with 2 coffees, and for a good 20 minutes it was wonderful, easy, the way things used to be. Her telling me about a kid in her class who'd finally read a whole chapter book out loud without stumbling, me telling her about the tomatoes coming in early this year. Then, stirring her coffee without quite meeting my eyes, she asked if I'd ever thought about something smaller, something with fewer stairs. I asked her if she was worried about my knees. She said something about how the house was a lot for one person, and then, casual as asking about the weather, whether I still had the original deed filed somewhere accessible, just in case anything ever happened. There it was, not shouted, not dramatic, just placed on the table between us like a napkin. I told her it was somewhere safe, gave her nothing more, and watched a flicker of something cross her face that I would have missed entirely a month earlier. Dot always said our daughter couldn't lie to save her life. Turns out she isn't much better at hiding an assignment somebody else gave her. The following Tuesday, I had a standing appointment with Marian Castellano, my attorney for going on 18 years now. The woman who handled Dot's estate and once beat me at gin rummy so badly I stopped keeping score out loud. I'd come in for something routine, updating a beneficiary form after a bank merger changed some account numbers. She finished the paperwork, slid the folder across the desk, then leaned back in her chair with an expression I didn't like one bit. She said she'd been debating whether to mention something. My stomach went tight. She told me your son-in-law's office had called hers a few months back, not about my file specifically. General questions, she said. The kind people ask when they're curious about aging relatives and their assets. He'd wanted to understand, in a roundabout way, what triggers a competency evaluation for an elderly homeowner, and whether moving into any kind of assisted care changes who holds title to a property. He never gave your name, Marian said, but he didn't have to. We sat there a minute in a silence that felt like 2 people reading the same uncomfortable page. Those aren't curiosity questions, I finally said. No, she agreed, those are logistics. I drove home slow that evening, Not because of traffic, but because every mile dissolved one more excuse I'd been keeping alive without quite admitting it. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it. Maybe that's just how real estate people talk. Maybe Karen doesn't know. One by one, gone. That night, I stood in my garage a long while, the one room in that house that still feels entirely like mine, tools hung exactly where my hands expect to find them, and I picked up a framed photo from our 25th anniversary. Laughing because I'd burned the anniversary steak so badly the smoke alarm went off twice. I said out loud to nobody that they think getting old means getting easy to move. The garage didn't answer me, but somehow, standing there, I felt like she did. The next morning I called Marion before 8 and told her I wanted to make some changes. What kind? She asked. The kind, I told her, that makes sure nobody ever again mistakes my kindness for a blank signature. She was quiet a second, then said she'd clear her afternoon. Here's what surprised me most about the next 2 weeks. None of it was about revenge, and Marion never once treated it that way. She asked me a single question that reframed the whole thing for me. What outcome, she asked, lets you actually sleep at night? And I thought about it honestly and told her I didn't want to punish anybody. I just never again wanted somebody planning the rest of my life without asking the man actually living it. So that's what we built. Across 3 separate meetings, a revocable trust, an independent trustee with no connection to my family whatsoever, updated medical directives, powers of attorney rewritten from the ground up, every single document saying the same quiet sentence in careful legal language. Nobody steps in and takes control of Harold Whitfield's affairs because they've decided on their own that they know better. No traps, no hidden recordings, no theatrics. Just a grown man finally locking his own doors properly. And I'll tell you something strange. The day those papers were signed, Trevor got smaller in my head, without me doing a single thing to him directly. For the first time in months, my whole world grew back out past the edges he'd been squeezing it into. Walter showed up that Saturday with 2 coffees and a question about whether I still had that old Chevy pickup running out in the back of the garage. Said there was a car show over in Waterford the next weekend if I was interested. I almost said no out of pure habit, and then I heard Dot's voice clear as the radio telling me I was allowed to have a hobby too. So, I went, and I stood in a parking lot full of old trucks and older stories, drinking bad coffee out of a paper cup while strangers argued about carburetors like it was a matter of national importance, and nobody there asked what phone I carried or how many stairs my house had. One fellow spent 20 minutes telling me about restoring a pickup with his granddaughter. Driving home that evening, I realized I'd laughed more in 4 hours than I had in the previous 4 months combined. I started volunteering that next week too. Thursday afternoons at a garage outside Erie that fixes up donated cars for veterans getting back on their feet, brakes and alternators, and the occasional transmission that made me feel 20 years younger just diagnosing it. I came home filthy every Thursday and somehow lighter every Friday morning. There's something about being useful to strangers that reminds you you're still worth something right at the moment your own family seems to have forgotten it. About 3 weeks after the driveway incident, Karen called and asked where I'd been, said I'd been hard to reach. I told her I'd been busy, a little fishing, a little volunteering. There was a pause, and then she said I'd never told her any of that. I said she'd never asked. The silence that followed wasn't angry, just unfamiliar. The sound of 2 people who'd spent 30 years arranging themselves around each other's schedules, suddenly having to find a new rhythm. One evening I pulled a legal pad across the kitchen table and wrote my daughter a letter, not an angry one, the true one, about her mother. About how scared I'd been of losing Karen too since Dot passed. About how I'd convinced myself that standing up for my own dignity was somehow the same thing as losing my daughter. Near the bottom, my pen wrote something that surprised even me. I never needed her to choose between her husband and her father. I only needed her to notice when someone treated her father like he didn't matter. I stared at that sentence a long time, because it was true, and true things carry weight you can feel in your hands. I folded it, sealed it, wrote her name on the envelope, and put it in the desk drawer in the living room. She wasn't ready yet. Maybe I wasn't either. A few days after that, Walter leaned on my fence while I was washing the truck and told me Trevor had been telling people around the neighborhood I'd been acting strange lately. Erratic was the word he'd apparently used. I laughed. That's new, I said. Walter grinned and told me the newest part was that Trevor was organizing a family sit-down to, in his words, clear the air. Neither one of us believed that phrase for a second. 2 nights later, Karen called, her voice careful in a way I recognized from childhood, right before she used to admit she'd broken something. Trevor wants everyone together Saturday to work things out, she said. Will you come? I looked out across my backyard at the evening light on the garden Dot planted the year we moved in, and I noticed something. I wasn't dreading it. I wasn't going there to defend myself or to audition for anybody's respect. That season, whatever you want to call it, was over. I told her I'd be there. She thanked me, sounding relieved, and I made one more call before I went to bed that night. Marion, I think it's time. She didn't ask time for what. She just said she'd meet me there. Saturday came in warm and clear, the kind of afternoon that used to mean burgers on the grill and nothing more complicated than that. Instead, I drove to my daughter's house with my attorney's car in my mirror the whole way, and the strangest passenger rode along beside me in that truck, which was something close to peace. A month earlier, I'd have rehearsed every possible argument the whole drive over. That day, there was nothing left to rehearse, because the truth doesn't need practice. Marion stepped out with her briefcase and asked if I was ready, reminded me we weren't there to fight. I told her I knew that. We're just done pretending, I said. Karen and Trevor's house sits on a cul-de-sac Trevor likes to call his dream lot, and usually forgets to mention which bank is doing most of the dreaming on his behalf. Everyone was already gathered when we walked in. Karen, Trevor, his parents, Cole, even Walter, who I'd later learn had been invited because Trevor heard he'd witnessed the driveway incident and wanted him, in Trevor's phrase, managed. The room went quiet the moment we stepped through the door. Trevor clocked Marion immediately and let out a short laugh. You brought a lawyer, he said, like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. I smiled and told him I'd brought a woman who's very good with paperwork. His grin widened. Dramatic, he said, while Marion calmly shook every hand in the room like she had all the time in the world. Karen's eyes were searching my face. Dad, what is this? She asked. I believe, I said. Trevor wanted to clear the air. I do, Trevor announced, planting himself by the fireplace with his hands in his pockets, hosting his own intervention in his own living room. We've all been uncomfortable since the garage thing, he said, scanning the room like he was gathering votes. I think Harold owes Cole an apology for making such a big deal out of an accident. Harold, not Dad, not even Mr. Whitfield. It's funny how respect leaves a family one word at a time, and you don't always notice it happening until somebody says your first name like it cost them nothing. Marion glanced my way, and I gave her the smallest nod, and the briefcase opened. What's that? Trevor asked, his smile still holding on by its fingernails. Marion's voice was the same, steady, unhurried one I'd heard across her desk for 18 years. Mr. Whitfield asked me here, she said, because certain misunderstandings have developed regarding his estate and his future care. Trevor laughed once, said something about what estate. Marion didn't look up from her folders. Over the past several weeks, she said, we've completed a comprehensive plan, a revocable living trust, one folder onto the coffee table, updated medical directives, a second folder, revised powers of attorney, a third, and an independent professional trustee. The temperature in that room changed the way a kitchen changes when you open the oven door too fast. Karen blinked at me. You did all that? She asked. I told her I had. I didn't know, she said, quieter now. I know, I told her, as gently as I could manage. Trevor crossed his arms and said he didn't see why any of this needed to be discussed in front of everybody. Marion looked directly at him for the first time since walking in. I think you do, she said. And for the first time all afternoon, Trevor stopped smiling entirely. Some months ago, Marion continued, a caller reached my office asking general questions about conservatorships, about how elderly homeowners can lose control of their own assets, about whether entering assisted living changes ownership of a property. Karen's head turned toward her husband slow enough that I could watch every degree of it. You called my father's attorney, she said. Those were hypothetical questions, Trevor said, too fast to sound convincing. I'm sure they were, Marion said pleasantly. I work in commercial real estate, Trevor said, louder now, like volume could substitute for an actual answer. Plenty of people work in real estate, Marion agreed. They don't typically call their father-in-law's personal attorney to ask how old men lose their houses. Nobody in that room was breathing. Trevor's father stared at the carpet. His mother's hands were folded so tight in her lap her knuckles had gone pale. And my daughter looked at her husband like a stranger had just peeled back his face to show her something underneath it. Why? She whispered. Trevor threw his hands up, said everyone was making this sound worse than it was, that he'd just been planning ahead. For what? Karen asked, and her voice cracked straight down the middle on the last word. For our future, he said. And Karen took one physical step backward, away from her own husband, and said a sentence I imagine I will hear replayed in my head for the rest of my life. My father's future is not your investment portfolio. The room stayed frozen a moment, and then Walter Neary cleared his throat from the corner where he'd been standing quiet as a fence post. I saw the boy come up that driveway, he said, and every head in the room turned toward him. That wasn't an accident. That's ridiculous, Trevor snapped. Walter didn't raise his voice, because men like Walter rarely need to. I've known Harold 20 years, he said, looking Trevor dead in the eye. Your son watched him the whole way up that driveway before he clipped that door. And then, into the longest silence of the entire afternoon, Walter added the rest. And I heard you back in the spring, in your own front yard, calling his garage a paid-off workshop on a half-acre. Trevor's face lost its color in stages, like a screen dimming down. Once the old man's reflexes finally go, Walter recited, word for word, that's basically a flip waiting to happen. Karen turned back to her husband one final time, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. You told me that was a joke, she said. Everyone's blowing this out of proportion, Trevor said. It wasn't a joke, she said. It wasn't. That's when I stood up, not out of anger, but because I wanted the whole room to hear this part at a normal, conversational volume. Nothing dramatic about it. I told them I hadn't come to embarrass anyone. I came because I'd spent almost 40 years building a life with my wife, and I looked at my daughter and told her all I'd wanted out of my retirement was fishing, old trucks, and Sunday dinners with her, and instead I'd found myself quietly checking whether I needed to defend my own front door. I told Trevor I'd never cared about the garage door itself. I cared that he found humiliating me entertaining, and I told everyone in that room, because this part mattered more, that somewhere along the way I'd convinced myself keeping the peace meant accepting disrespect as the cost of staying at the table. I was wrong about that, I said. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was just honest, maybe the first fully honest silence that family had shared in years. Marion quietly closed her briefcase and said she believed our business there was concluded. Nobody stopped us at the door. Behind me, Karen said one word, Dad. I turned, and my daughter stood there with what looked like 100 sentences jammed up in her throat, none of them able to get loose, and then she simply started to cry. I gave her a small, sad smile and walked out into the sunlight. In the driveway, Marion asked how I felt. I started the truck and sat with the question a second before I found the word for it. Lighter, I told her. She nodded like a woman who'd seen that particular relief cross a client's face plenty of times before. That's what happens, she said, when people finally put down things that were never theirs to carry in the first place. I drove home with the windows down for the first time in longer than I could remember. Life didn't turn to glass and sunshine after that afternoon. Real life never does that for anybody. I still woke at 5:30 out of habit. My knees still complained on the porch steps. Dot's chair still sat empty across the kitchen table every single night. Some things don't rearrange themselves just because you finally told the truth out loud. 3 days later, Karen called, and I let it ring through, not out of spite, just because I didn't have words for her yet, and mowed the lawn instead. A week after that, she knocked on my door instead of calling. She looked worn thin, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back without much care, none of her usual polish. Can I come in? She asked. Of course, I told her, and made coffee. She sat down in Dot's chair without thinking about it, then froze halfway through the motion. I'm sorry, she said. It's okay, I told her, and meant every word of it. We didn't touch the coffee for a good 5 minutes. I didn't know, Dad, she finally said. I believe you, I told her, and watched her gather up the courage to be braver than that sentence. But that's not the whole truth, she said, staring into her cup. I saw the little comments over the years. I heard the jokes. I just kept telling myself they were small. They were small, I said softly. One at a time, she said, looking up at me, but together they were a direction. Her eyes filled up. I should have stopped it years ago, she said. I put my hand over hers on the table and told her the truest thing I had in me. You loved your husband, I said. I still do, she whispered. I know, I told her. And I love you too, she said, and cried the kind of quiet crying that comes from finally setting something heavy down. When she left that afternoon, she hugged me harder than she had in years, and I let myself hope, just for a moment, that we'd turned some kind of corner. We hadn't, not yet. 2 weeks later, she was back, angry this time, though not at me exactly, more at the whole wreckage of it. "Trevor's telling people everyone ganged up on him," she said. I nodded. "He says Walter exaggerated." I said, "I see. He says your lawyer ambushed him," she said. I didn't say anything to that one. And then came the question she'd actually driven over to ask. "Can't we all just move past this?" she said. I looked at my daughter a long moment, then walked over to the living room desk, opened the drawer, and took out the envelope with her name written on the front. "I wrote you this," I told her. She reached for it, and I gently drew it back. "Not yet," I said. Her face fell. "Dad, why not?" she asked. "Because you're not ready," I told her. "And because right now, sweetheart, you're still trying to manage everyone else's pain except your own." She wiped her eyes and said she didn't know what to do. "You don't have to solve it today," I told her. She hugged me at the door before she left, and neither one of us said his name once the whole visit. Another month went by. Summer eased into fall out there along Route 9, the maples starting to turn at the edges the way they do every year like clockwork. Thursdays still belonged to the veterans' garage. Saturdays belonged to coffee with Walter or a car show somewhere within driving distance. And for the first time since Dot passed, I wasn't just getting through my days anymore. I was actually living them. Then one cool afternoon in October, a third knock came at my door. Karen stood on the porch alone, and something in her face had settled, gone calmer, older somehow, cleaner around the edges. She sat down across from me and said 2 words. "I left," she said. I didn't ask for the details, though she gave me the one that mattered most anyway. "I asked him one question," she said. "I asked if he'd have treated you that way if Mom were still alive." She smiled the saddest smile I'd seen on her since the funeral. "He couldn't answer me, Dad," she said. "Not one word." I closed my eyes for a second, mostly for Dot. And then Karen said the sentence that told me my daughter had finally come all the way back to herself. "I spent years calling it keeping the peace," she said. "But all I was really doing was asking you to carry it alone." Then she surprised me. She stood up, walked into my kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and pulled out a butcher paper package. 2 ribeyes, she said. I stopped at the market on the way over. "You planning dinner?" I asked her. "If you'll let me help," she said. And for the first time since her mother died, somebody stood beside me at that grill instead of waiting at the table for whatever I brought them. The coals crackled the way they always do right before they're ready, and my daughter reached into the recipe box by the stove, pulled out her mother's card, and squinted at the faded handwriting. "Salt goes on an hour before, right?" she asked. "Your mother would be proud of you," I told her, and my voice didn't entirely hold together on the last word. She laughed through tears and said she finally understood why these Sundays had always mattered so much to me. "So do I told her. Now more than ever." When dinner was ready, she carried my plate out to the table herself, careful with both hands, set it down in front of me, looked me in the eye, and said 6 words. "Eat it while it's hot, Dad." I don't think she'll ever fully understand the size of that sentence. Months earlier, a boy laughed at a dented door to show a driveway full of people exactly what he thought I was worth. Now my own daughter was standing guard over my dinner plate like it mattered. No speech, no ceremony to it, just plain respect, served warm. Some nights that's the whole banquet a man needs. She and Trevor finalized the divorce quietly the following spring. No courtroom drama, no celebration on my end either, if I'm honest. I felt more grief over it than victory, because no father dreams of watching his daughter's marriage come apart, whatever the reason. But I'd learned something in that living room that afternoon that I don't think I'll ever be able to unlearn again. A family cannot survive on respect that only flows in one direction, no matter how good the pot roast is. These days, Sunday dinner still happens at my table. The guest list runs shorter now. Some weeks it's just Karen and me. Some weeks Walter wanders over, or one of the fellows from the veterans' garage stops by after his own family obligations wind down. The table's not as full as it used to be back when Dot was alive to fill it, but the laughter in that kitchen is real now, and nobody sitting at it is performing for anybody else's comfort. Every so often I catch myself glancing at that garage door, patched up now, good as new if you don't know where to look. The dent's long gone. What stayed with me wasn't the damage. It was everything I finally understood after it. I used to believe that protecting my family meant absorbing whatever they decided to hand me. No questions, no complaints. Just take it and keep the table set. I don't believe that anymore. Getting older doesn't make a man worth less. It just means you've finally logged enough miles to tell the difference between love and obligation, and once you learn to tell those two apart, the whole rest of the road gets a lot lighter to walk. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually try this week, and it won't cost you a dime. The next time somebody's little joke lands on you, the same target every single time, say one calm sentence out loud. That one lands on me, not with me, and leave it right there. No anger behind it, just information, and you'll learn everything you need to know from whatever happens after you say it. And here's the question I'd leave sitting on your table tonight, the one I chewed on for longer than I care to admit. How much of what you've been calling keeping the peace was really just you keeping quiet? Now it's your turn, because I've second-guessed that whole afternoon in Karen's living room more times than I could count. Put a 1 in the comments if you think I handled that garage door and everything after it exactly right. Put a 2 if you think I should have said something the very day it happened, instead of waiting weeks and letting a lawyer do the talking for me. Put a 3 if you think, like I sometimes do late at night, that I waited entirely too long and the real mistake was years of swallowed jokes before that Mustang ever came up the driveway. Tell me what state you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are, because it still amazes me how far a story out of a garage in Erie, Pennsylvania can travel. And if you've ever been the person at the table everybody's just kidding about, or the parent whose kids forgot to check whether you were all right, tell me down in the comments, because somebody watching this tonight is out there rehearsing an apology for something that was never their fault, and they need to hear that they're allowed to put it down for good. If this one meant something to you, subscribe and stick around, because I've got a lifetime of these stories left in me, and this little corner of the internet only stays lit because folks like you keep coming back to it. Thank you, truly, for sitting here with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one.